Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
Atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today again, just like on the weekend show, by Trey Orndorff and Russ Gifford. And Russ, I enjoyed having you on the first show, your first appearance, and got to say you threw a little philosophy in there with Camus. And while I'm not much of an existentialist and maybe more of a Taoist at this point, if I'm anything, it was kind of cool to bring that perspective in. And I'm looking forward to hearing your perspective and, of course, Trey, yours on the stuff we didn't have a chance to get to on the weekend show. And one thing I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while now is that speech that Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney gave at Davos. It's a speech in which he argued that the rules-based international order had ruptured, and he said that middle powers like Canada should move away from their reliance on hegemons. Now, clearly, he meant the U.S. because, honestly, it's the only country that has a strong claim to be a global hegemon, but also, okay, to a lesser extent, China. And Carney suggested that like-minded countries could accomplish this by kind of moving away from that tight integration with hegemons and forming coalitions with other middle powers. Or as he put it, you cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination. Now, President Trump responded to this by saying, they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. And then following this, Trump rescinded his invitation to Canada to join his Gaza, quote-unquote, Board of Peace and threatened a 100% tariff on Canadian goods if Canada negotiates a comprehensive trade deal with China. And this also, I should point out, potentially complicates the renegotiation of the USMCA trade treaty between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, which has a mandatory joint review this summer. And just as a side note, my wife loves to call this agreement not USMCA, but Camus, which also works for the acronym there. Kind of a little catchier to me. But anyway, Trey, I'll start with you again. I think you can take this a couple ways. Carney is arguing sort of something descriptively, and then he's making a diagnostic case. And so I'm wondering, do you think that Carney is right both descriptively and diagnostically about what we're seeing in the international system here?
I think to an extent he is correct diagnostically, but I think he is deeply flawed prescriptively. That's the short version here. Diagnostically, he is approaching this as a realist, and I appreciate that because that is the mode of President Trump currently, and that is the mode of Putin currently. And so you're living in that kind of universe. And so I understand when he says, look, the old order, is gone. I get that, right? That idea of these international agreements. I can't disagree with that. However, when he moves on, for example, and he says, we should not mourn it. No, I'm sorry, friend, but that's where you're 100% wrong. The answer here is it's not going to work the correct way when you have major powers who aren't going to play by international law and by liberal institutionalism. However, that doesn't mean that we should go along with those rule breakers. It would be the analogy I'd like to set out for us, and I'm curious what you guys think about this, is if we see somebody robbing a bank, we rightfully point out that they're robbing the bank. And even if we can't stop them, that doesn't mean we say, it's time for everybody to rob the bank. Instead, we double down on the fact that, look, I can't stop this right now. However, it's still wrong. And we continue to call that out. And we continue to point out the ways in which those institutions should exist to point that out so that at the time when we can stop the bank robbers again, we can. So I agree with his description, but I wholeheartedly disagree with his prescription.
Okay. Russ, what do you think?
Yeah, I want to say, ultimately, I'm inclined to agree. I mean, anybody who's ever sat in, a sort of foreign policy class where you're discussing, liberalism and realism or Marxism, feminism, etc., which, likely would have happened with your wife, Mike. But
I was
you
in that
all,
class, actually.
yeah, that makes it even better. That makes it even better. You always get this feeling that you want to lean more toward liberalism making sense or something given the current restrictions and circumstances of the world that we live in, but also that
Because
realism just makes sense. It just makes sense. And I always felt like it was so hard to argue against it, even though I felt like I had to. And so to me, it just feels like a Western country. I know Carney says that they're like an energy superpower and all this. No, I don't get the feeling that anybody's too concerned with what Canada has to say necessarily. It's interesting because of the sole fact that it feels like another Western country is kind of saying the quiet part out loud, which is that they can't really afford to just continually make concessions. Whether or not they're going to be able to, to the sort of rules that they'd like to build in this value-based realism where not everyone even has the same values and they kind of just willy-nilly figure things out as they go with variable geometry and ad hoc
Well,
coalitions that are built out of these different issues. I don't know, but
Well, yeah, and on that point, Russ, I think one of the real benefits of a real rules-based international system is that it kind of provides that stability, that predictability, that kind of economies of scale in a way, that kind of a more balkanized, you can't get with a more balkanized sort of system. But the only way this system works is if, well, and Carney said this in his speech, that, the great powers have always sort of made their own rules a little bit, but it was our willingness to, at least some of the time, restrain ourselves in the interest of that stability and predictability of the system that made the whole system possible. And if we just turn everything into essentially a transactional relationship, well, then that whole system just falls apart, essentially. And so I think the anti-Trumpian argument here is that we get maybe some short-term gains, but long-term, we are going to end up losing out if this international system that we have the leading role in as the hegemon, if that collapses.
Well, I think it's similar to what Trey was saying earlier about, whether or not we're approaching this sort of, Civil War zeitgeist moment domestically in the international order in terms of, are we at a moment in time, which I personally believe that America is an empire in decline. I think when we look at domestically how quickly things are unfolding, I maybe this is hubris, but I don't really feel like it can be argued as we watch other powers rise up economically and et cetera. I don't think that we're at a moment in time where other countries are going to be able to entirely distance themselves from us and not kind of play by the rules that are set by us as a hegemonic power. Maybe in 10, 15, 20 years, I don't know, I can't read the future, but it doesn't feel that way to me.
Trey, before we get to you on that, I want to just kind of respond to something directly that you said, Russ, about that empire in decline idea. And of course, the whole public persona of Trump and Trump MAGAism is make America great again, all that sort of thing. But you could make an argument that maybe behind the scenes, to pull back, this system, you could say, only works with sort of a single uncontested hegemon. I think that's probably true. But you could say that, well, maybe Trump is thinking, there are some people in his administration are thinking, you know what, with the rise of China, what we have here, our hegemonic position is essentially a depreciating asset. And so we should monetize that asset while we still can, sort of like how, like I'm trying to think of a good analogy, like how kind of if you're a football team and you have an aging star, well, you maybe want to move that star where you can still get a draft pick or two from them. before waiting on and just having this kind of albatross essentially is not really doing much for you. And I think that's not a crazy sort of view of things.
I would be careful, though. The wane of the United States in light of recent events with Trump can be easily overblown in the face of the data, right?
Sure.
So let's put a few things in context. Right today, the projections for the 2025-2026 year is that we're going to produce somewhere between 30 and 30, almost $32 trillion in economic activity in the United States. The second closest to us on that front, the projection is China, which is going to be 19 to 20 trillion. And then everybody else, right, is going to be under that.
Sure.
You're going to have Germany, Japan, India's in there, but they're coming in. To put this in kind of economic perspective, that meant last year, the United States was 26% of the global GDP. In other words, if you take a look at everybody, we produce 26% of the things. So now that doesn't mean, I'm not suggesting that what Trump is doing is okay or right, but I also suggest we have to be careful. Sometimes events slap us in the face and we overemphasize the recencies to the long-term actual empiricists of it. So I just want us to put, again, that doesn't suggest that there can't be issues here, but I just think we needed some of that context. And so when we're listening to the Davos speeches, when we're listening to these moments, we invade, we bomb Venezuela, what's going on, be careful to not think that somehow the United States is 2 years away. The biggest item empirically that's going to have issues, you brought it up on the main show, Mike, was our financing of debt and our GDP to debt. That could get terrible quickly. But even that is not going to end us. Again, that's always been one of my biggest issues with kind of the sky is falling gold guys. I have some sympathy, but at the same time, guys, that's not how things go down, right? Especially not when you're 26% of the global production of the world, right? So that would be my ad right here.
Okay. Yeah, I guess another way of looking at this, and again, all of us have heard Donald Trump and MAGA say, the rest of the world has been taking advantage of us for generations at this point. And, there is a case to be made for that. But I guess what I would point out is that there also are benefits that we get, very real benefits we get from being the global hegemon, like being able to run up and finance that sort of debt with the dollar being the reserve currency, that sort of thing. But the thing is that the costs that we pay out are almost certainly easier to calculate than the benefits that the United States gets. And it could be very short-sighted to say, well, we're just going to focus on the cost that we can measure and not all of these very undisputable benefits that are just harder to put a price tag on. And that's kind of my concern for the Trump position, that the sort of long-term trust erosion and the move away from the U.S. is going to end up hurting us a lot more than any sort of short-term gains we can get from kind of pressuring other countries using our power, using our money.
Especially as related to trade.
Yeah. Russ?
I still just think it's more of a substance versus form sort of thing, and that might just, perhaps that's me not being nearly as interested in data and empirics as I'm not a positivist, I guess, but we have to look at the substance of a Western leader coming out and then doubling down also. Like, it's so incredibly important that a Trump admin, I forget his name, is it Besser or Besson?
Besson, yeah.
Besson comes out and he's like, "Oh, Carney just had a phone call with Trump," and he aggressively walked all of that back. And Carney has to come out and say, "No, I didn't." So you see the Trump admin doing this sort of the thing that they do all the time, which, like you said earlier, Trey, they grift and they try to get ahead of the curve, and they want to prime and set the narrative early so that it can't be disagreed with. But like, Carney's doubling down on this, which I don't know if it's just me being young or what it is, but it feels massive. It might not be. And ultimately, I don't feel like it will be. But everyone that I've talked to who's asked me about it has seen this sort of excitement from me to see this challenge or this antagonism being located and found and spoken about actively. Just to see it, it feels like a big deal. Now, the empirics might not support it, but it when the kid who's bullied finally shows up to school one day and he says, "I've had enough," you might look at the data and say, "Well, the other guy's a lot bigger." But it's still a big deal that the other kid showed up.
Yeah.
To
No, and
me, the
it's
substance
more
of it
than
is
just
so interesting
yeah,
or
I'd say it's
exciting.
more than just rhetorical because we see Canada and other countries working on like sort of a kind of a TPP-ish sort of trade deal with Asian countries in Canada and Europe and cutting the US out. So I think it's more than just the kid showing up at the schoolyard against a bully. They're trying to take steps. But Trey, to your point, you mentioned economic dominance. There's this not only that, but moving away is going to be tricky because a lot of the a lot of the world is really locked into a lot of US defense systems and tech systems, and you can't just snap your fingers, and that's a lot of leverage. Let me give you an example. Just look at AI, right? If we just look at AI technology capacity, one aspect, but of course, some people say this could be bigger than electricity. I mean, the biggest thing since, even if they're discounting it, it's a big deal. We're going to be talking about it here in a little bit more specifically, but right now, according to the Federal Reserve 2025, the U.S. controls between 70 and 75% of global high-end AI compute. China's at 10 to 15%. The EU is under 5%. Or if you look at investment, since 2022, when ChatGPT came out, private AI investment in the U.S. is like 10 times that of China, and the EU as a whole is a bit below China. And even if you look in terms of talent, around 60% of top AI researchers work in the U.S., even though way fewer of them actually started here. So, I mean, we have such a lead, not just in economic power, but in AI compute investment and talent that it's going to be really tricky for these middle powers to pull back because, especially in an area like AI that rewards first movers and rewards bigness and scale, maybe the Trump administration is saying, you know what? We're the hegemon. We're going to be the hegemon for the foreseeable future. There's nothing anyone can do about it as long as we push forward, especially in AI, which the Trump administration has been really strong in trying to do. And so we're just going to extract as much as we can and because there's no place else in the world, literally, that these other countries can go. So suck it, rest of the world. We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group,